Welcome everybody. What we have today, we've got something special. We're gonna do my first crack at a painting tutorial video. So let's take a look at what we got here. So I've got a World of Tanks miniature M4A1 Sherman. It's for the World of Tanks miniature game, if you guys didn't know. Yes, that exists. This is a little blister pack of an M4 Sherman, and yeah, it's by the same company that does Flames of War, so it's basically a painted up Flames of War model that's pre-assembled, but yeah, anyways, I say we get started, so let's dive in. Okay, so maybe that was a little bit of camera trickery, and through some camera trickery, we actually already got a few things done on this model. So you may notice it has a little bit of an antenna going on there, and with a bit of snipping and drilling, it's magnetized. So this tutorial isn't going to cover like the model preparation that I went through, but if you guys are interested to see how I put in the antennas and how I do the magnetizing, you know, let me know. But I mean, this thing is strong enough to be held, you know, by the turret. It'll stay together. It's not going to get knocked around too easily. Even the antennas in there are pretty stiff. So first thing we need is our first coat of paint. One thing that I do want to cover before we get into the painting though, is that this miniature is actually already painted. These come pre-painted from the blister pack, so you don't necessarily need to paint these things up. And also, because they're pre-painted, you don't actually need to undercoat these models with any kind of primer. You can actually paint right over the surface, and it'll stay quite nicely. The first one we've got here is number 887, which is US Olive Drab. What you're gonna need is probably 2 to 3 thin coats of this on the model. And so we're just going to go ahead and start painting this. You're going to see these colors match, but I'm still going to paint over this whole thing because there is a slight color difference there that might be kind of hard to pick up. So I'm going to go ahead and finish painting this, and I'll see you in the next step. Once we've got our mini base coated, the next step is to do some shading. And the paint you're going to want for this is Vallejo. It's going to be a Sepia Wash. It's color code 73.200. Unfortunately, my local hobby store was sold out of the Vallejo Sepia Wash, but I've got an equivalent here from Citadel. It's going to be Seraphim Sepia. What you're not going to want to do is let it pool up on large flat panels. You're going to want to go all the way along the sides and make sure you get it into the rivets, around the tools, stuff like that. Now that our M4 is sufficiently grimy, what we got to do now is go back and actually repaint the flat surfaces, going back over it with olive drab again. And what you want to do is you want to start going back over the flat panels that you just darkened, leaving the recesses nice and built up with that shade that we just went in there with. So we finished brightening up back to our olive camo color. The tank is looking pretty darn grimy. We can see a lot more detail now than we used to be able to. We used a little bit of layering and dry brushing to get us back to the original color while leaving a lot of that shade in those recesses. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to highlight all the edges and corners of the vehicle. So to do that, we are going to use 2 paints. We're going to bring back the US Olive Drab that we've been using, and we're going to do a 50-50 mix with this green-brown color. Perfect. So before we get our dry brushing, we got to get the brush dry. So what you do is you dab this off on a paper towel until most of it is off your brush, so you can see how it's getting kind of thin. And now what you do is you run it along the ridges to make them pop out. So all right, so our vehicle has been highlighted with that mixture, and it's looking real good. It's got a lot of depth to it now. The armor is mostly done on this vehicle at this point in time, so we're going to move on to the next part of the vehicle, which will be doing the tracks. So on this particular model of Sherman, if you look at the tracks, this is actually the rubber variant. Some of them you'll see like a chevron that sits in the middle of the pad, and that chevron will be metallic. But the next step right now is to paint these rubber track pieces, and we're gonna do that in Vallejo Black, which is color 950. One thing to note here is you're gonna wanna pull your turret off. This one's magnetized, so that when you're done, you can leave the vehicle upside down to let it dry. It's a little bit tricky to paint in this area. It's okay if you get a little bit of black on the underside of the hull, because that'll just look like a shadow. Okay, so while you are doing the tracks, one other thing you want to work on are these road wheels, because there's actually rubber on the outside of these road wheels. So make sure you handle that. One thing I wanted to mention is make sure you're using a smaller brush to keep control of the paint a little bit better. A larger one worked better earlier on because really it didn't matter if you messed up. Now, if you do make any mistakes, you can just go back in and tidy up with more of that olive green paint. The next step is to start painting the metal links that connect all these tracks together. And what we're going to use to paint that is this color right here, which is chocolate brown, which is Vallejo 872. So what we're going to do is we're going to run brush along these links here. And we're also going to do the links that connect each of these tracks. We're going to run it along these little raised pieces here too. Okay, so we finished doing the brown, the German dark brown, chocolate brown on the tracks. You can see they're looking pretty good. We still have the black all blocked in there. So the next step in the process is to do a dry brushing on the chocolate brown areas using oily steel, which is Vallejo paint 865. Now, unfortunately, my local hobby store also had that one out of stock. So we're going to substitute a different paint for that. We've got with us here another Citadel color, which is Lead Belcher. So what you want to do is run your brush along the edge of the brown track pieces that we just painted. And you'll see it'll start to pick up on the edges quite nicely, and they'll start to stick out. Okay, so now that we've finished dry brushing a little bit of the oily steel onto the tracks, we can now kind of darken things back up a little bit here, as these are just a touch too bright. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to our sepia color, which is 73.200. And what we want to do is just run this on the tracks. So just keep this on the areas that we've previously painted and go over all those metallics and the browns and a little bit on the blacks to kind of muddy and darken everything back up just a little bit here. Okay, so we've sufficiently darkened down all of the track links there. They're looking pretty good and dirty. So the next step in the painting process is to start working on these tools on the back of the engine deck. So to make this a little bit easier, we're going to take the turret off and kind of leave it off for now. And you'll see that these tools have kind of two components. There's a wood piece and then there's a metallic piece, like on that shovel there. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to tackle the wood pieces. And the first color we're going to do that with is this one here, which is Vallejo model color 826. You're going to need a pretty slim brush for this one because the tools are quite small at a 1/100 scale, but they're not too bad. I'll show you a little trick here. You get a little bit on your brush, but make sure you have good control over it. And what you're going to do is you're going to use the edge of the brush to run it lengthwise down the tool. So this shovel here, we're just going to do it like that. Okay, so now that we have finished painting the wooden parts of the tools, next we're going to paint the metallic parts. We'll be using oily steel again, which is Vallejo 865. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to use the edge of the brush and run it along the raised piece. All right, so now that the metals have been painted on there, the next thing we want to do is darken them back down just a little bit. We're going to use the Sepia Wash, which is Vallejo 200. We're going to use the exact same technique we have been using. We're going to go in and highlight the wood, and we're going to use Vallejo 988, which is Khaki. And what you're going to want to do is a very thin line on the edge of the wood. Now, optionally, if you want to, you can go back in for a little bit of a highlight with the oily steel on the very edges of the shovels and the tools. All right, we put the turret back on, and there's just 2 more steps before this miniature is all done. The next thing we got to do is put decals on. I'm going to have a separate video on how to do decals, so once that video is out, I'll put a link in the description there. After that, then we do weathering. We always want to make sure we do decals before weathering, because putting the weathering over top of the decals helps seal them in and hide the fact that they're decals a little bit. So I will be right back with some awesome decals. So at this point in the process, we put a little bit of paint back on around the decals to try and tie them in just a little bit more. And if you really want it to be done, you could be done. This could be the end of your painting journey for this vehicle. I, however, am going to take this one step further, and we are going to do kind of a sandy, dusty, really dry looking weathering effect down the sides and a little bit on the turret. And to do that, we're going to be dry brushing some Vallejo Iraqi sand on here. You're just going to start rubbing this onto the vehicle along the tracks, along the sides of the tank. And what you want to do is just allow this color to slowly build up a layer of dry dust on the side of the vehicle. It's better to go a little bit less and then build into it rather than going real heavy and trying to pull it back a little bit, because you're not going to be able to do that. You want to go less is more on this and slowly build it up over time, because you'd have to repaint the whole model to undo any of the weathering you're doing at this point. To give you an idea of the effect I'm going for, so I finished one side. This is the side that's unfinished. The back and this side are unfinished. And then if we flip it over, we'll see the dust build up on the front and the bottom half of the tank there. So now I'm just going to go ahead and do the other side. Alrighty then, our tank is good and dusty. She's looking pretty much done here. There's only one other weathering effect that I'm going to add to this vehicle, and that's going to be, I'm going to add streaks from these diesel fuel filler caps going down the side of the vehicle to kind of show a little bit of overflow and you know, that the vehicle's in use. We're going to use Sepia for this. This will be Vallejo model color 200. We're going to get just a very small amount on the brush. You're going to want a lot of control over this. And what you're going to do is you're going to run this down from the fuel filler cap into this crowbar tool. And then you're going to create streaks from the crowbar down the side of the vehicle. Now this fuel effect is actually on both sides, as there's a left and right fuel tank. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and call this miniature all set. Thanks, guys.